Everyone thinks the Asian financial crisis happened because a few Asian countries mismanaged their economies, that they borrowed too much, spent too fast, and collapsed under their own mistakes. That story is neat, comfortable, and very wrong. The Asian financial crisis wasn't a regional accident. It was a global financial ambush, built quietly, ignored deliberately, and triggered the moment the world's most powerful money decided it was time to leave. And once it started, it didn't just destroy economies. It rewired how modern finance works forever. Imagine waking up in a country where everything looks normal, the streets are busy, businesses are open, and banks are smiling, but behind the scenes, money is quietly running for the exits. Currencies are weakening hour by hour, investors are panicking in silence, and governments are desperately pretending everything is under control. This wasn't chaos you could see immediately. This was slow, invisible financial suffocation. Even economists were panicking, which is rare, because they usually don't panic until the damage is already irreversible. The official story of the Asian financial crisis sounds simple enough. In the 1990s, countries like Thailand, Indonesia, South Korea, and Malaysia were growing incredibly fast. Their economies were booming, their cities were expanding. Foreign investors poured in money. According to the textbooks, the crisis happened because these countries overheated too much borrowing, weak regulation, poor banking practices. When confidence fell, investors panicked, currencies collapsed, and everything spiraled out of control. End of story. Except that explanation skips the most important question. Why did confidence fall all at once? Why did money leave so suddenly, so violently, and so selectively? Because economies don't just collapse overnight unless someone pulls the plug. And in 1997, the plug wasn't pulled by Asian workers, small businesses, or governments. It was pulled by global capital and the system that allowed it to move without consequences. Here's the part they don't like to explain clearly. Throughout the early 1990s, Asia was labeled the miracle region. Countries were growing at unbelievable speeds. Thailand, for example, was growing at over 8% a year. South Korea was becoming a manufacturing powerhouse. Indonesia was attracting billions in foreign investment. Western banks, hedge funds, and multinational corporations loved this. They saw cheap labor, fast growth, and governments eager to welcome foreign money. So money flooded in. But this wasn't long-term investment. It wasn't patient capital building, stable foundations. It was hot money, short-term loans, speculative investments, and dollar-denominated debt chasing fast returns. Asian banks borrowed heavily in US dollars because interest rates were low and the exchange rates were stable. On paper it looked brilliant. Borrow cheap dollars, invest locally, grow fast, and repay later. The problem was hidden in plain sight. These economies were earning in local currencies but borrowing in dollars. As long as exchange rates stayed fixed or stable, everything worked. But the moment currencies weakened, the debt would explode. Everyone involved knew this risk. Banks knew it. Governments knew it. International institutions knew it. They just assumed it would never happen or that someone else would pay the price if it did. It was like building a skyscraper on sand while arguing over how impressive the view would be from the top. Thailand was the first crack in the illusion. The Thai baht had been pegged to the US dollar for years. That peg created confidence. Investors believed the government would defend it no matter what, but defending a currency requires massive reserves. And Thailand was bleeding dollars quietly as investors started questioning whether the boom is real or inflated by debt and speculation. In July 1997, Thailand finally broke. The government abandoned the peg. The baht collapsed. And in that moment, global investors didn't just panic about Thailand, they panicked about the entire region. Because if one miracle economy could fall, maybe all of them were illusions. Money fled Asia with terrifying speed. Investors didn't wait to see what would happen. They sold everything. Stocks crashed, currencies collapsed. Banks that had borrowed heavily in dollars suddenly found their debts doubling and tripling overnight. What had been manageable loans became impossible obligations. This is where the crisis stopped being financial and started becoming human. In Indonesia, the currency collapsed so fast that prices exploded. Food became unaffordable almost overnight. Businesses closed, riots broke out. Decades of economic progress evaporated in months. In South Korea, massive corporations that had been symbols of national pride suddenly faced bankruptcy. Unemployment surged. Families that had never experienced economic insecurity were suddenly drowning in debt. And the cruel irony was this: the people suffering had never borrowed billions in foreign currency. They never speculated on exchange rates. They never sat in air-conditioned offices moving money across borders with a click. Yet they paid the full price. Some economists still argue this was simply market discipline at work, that weak systems were exposed and corrected. But that argument ignores one uncomfortable truth. Markets didn't gently correct Asia. They stampeded through it, took profits, and left destruction behind. This wasn't discipline, it was extraction. The real dirty secret of the Asian financial crisis is that the system was designed to allow capital to enter freely, profit aggressively, and exit instantly, while the risks stayed trapped inside national borders. Governments were encouraged to open their markets. Banks were encouraged to deregulate. Capital controls were discouraged or mocked as outdated. The message was clear: let money move freely, and prosperity will follow. What they didn't say out loud was this: when money leaves, you're on your own. As the crisis spread, international institutions stepped in, most notably the International Monetary Fund. The IMF offered bailout packages to countries like Thailand, Indonesia, and South Korea, but the money came with conditions. Governments were told to raise interest rates, cut spending, shut down banks, and open their economies even more to foreign ownership. The logic was technical: restore confidence, stabilize currencies, attract investors back. But on the ground, the effects were brutal. Higher interest rates crushed businesses, austerity measures deepened recessions, social safety nets were slashed at the exact moment people needed them most. It was like telling a drowning man to stop struggling and prove he deserved a lifeboat. In South Korea, the crisis became a national humiliation. The country accepted an IMF bailout worth tens of billions of dollars. Citizens were encouraged to donate personal gold to help repay the debt. Families handed over wedding rings, heirlooms, and jewelry, not because they caused the crisis, but because the system demanded sacrifice from those with the least power. And yet, global investors returned quickly. Once currencies collapsed, assets became cheap, companies were bought, banks were acquired, profits resumed. The same system that fueled the crisis benefited from its aftermath. This is where the story gets deeply uncomfortable. Because the Asian financial crisis wasn't just about Asia, it was a warning shot for the entire world. It showed what happens when financial systems are built around speed, leverage, and blind faith in markets. It showed that growth fueled by debt is fragile. And it proved that when crises happen, the costs are socialized while gains remain private. But here's the part that still affects you today. After 1997, Asian countries changed their behavior permanently. They began hoarding foreign exchange reserves. They became obsessed with export surpluses. They avoided IMF assistance at all costs. China, watching closely, took this lesson seriously. Accumulate reserves, control capital flows, never depend on foreign money for survival. Those decisions reshaped the global economy. The massive reserves built by Asian countries flowed back into Western financial markets, helping keep interest rates low. Cheap money fueled housing bubbles. Leverage increased, and a decade later, the world experienced another crisis, this time centered in the United States. The 2008 financial crisis didn't come out of nowhere. It was the next chapter in a story that 1997 had already warned us about. The Asian financial crisis also permanently changed how governments view globalization. It exposed the myth that open markets automatically create stability. It revealed that financial integration without safeguards is dangerous. And it showed that economic success measured only by growth numbers can hide catastrophic vulnerabilities underneath. People often say the crisis ended by the early 2000s. Economies recovered, growth returned, stock markets stabilized, but the psychological scars never healed. Trust in institutions eroded, inequality widened, political resentment grew, and the idea that globalization always benefits everyone began to crumble. Finance, at its core, isn't about numbers. It's about behavior. Fear spreads faster than logic. Greed ignores warning signs. And confidence, once broken, is almost impossible to rebuild. The Asian financial crisis of 1997 taught the world a lesson it keeps forgetting. Money has no loyalty. It doesn't care about borders, people, or promises. It moves where it's treated best, and leaves the moment it isn't. Every major crisis follows the same pattern: excess confidence, easy money, ignored warnings, sudden panic, and then a long, painful cleanup paid for by people who never voted for the rules. If this story feels uncomfortably familiar, that's because it should. Because the system that collapsed Asia in 1997 is still alive. It's faster now, bigger, more complex, but not smarter. And if you think the Asian financial crisis was shocking, wait until you see how close the world keeps coming to repeating it again.